Apple M2 is finally here, and we're getting our first taste of it in this product, the M2 equipped 13-inch MacBook Pro, which is actually running a lot of dated hardware, and some of it is like 6 years old at this point. But I was able to compare this M2 equipped product with the M1 products from the previous generation, as well as some of the big boy M1 Pro products. And this new M2 chip is really good. The CPU is like 10 to maybe 15% better than what was available in M1, like the base M1. It's not as powerful as like M1 Pro, M1 Max stuff, but it's a decent step up. But in terms of the GPU, this is massively better. It's like 35–40% better than what was available in M1. And I think that's very significant because the GPU was, I think, the weakest point of the base M1 products. Like, they were good, but they weren't great GPUs. The M2 product is so much better, and it's partly because they're running 2 extra cores on that GPU, but M2 on the whole is very fast. Xcode builds are faster, Final Cut is faster, Premiere is faster, games are faster, benchmarks are faster, everything's faster. It's M2, right? It's kind of what you'd expect from Apple for their second generation of Apple Silicon, and if your workflow can take advantage of that speed, and especially if you're in Apple's ecosystem and using their apps, this is a fantastic product. It still is a 5nm process on the chip. It has faster clock speeds, a couple more GPU cores, faster RAM, but aside from that M2 chip, the rest of the product is largely the same compared to last year's M1 MacBook Pro. Even the battery life is pretty much the same. It still has a crazy long battery life, and it's a really good system, but when you look at what else is coming around the corner, namely the M2 MacBook Air, which is a much sleeker and new looking system, the question people are asking is like, why does this thing even exist? Like, why did they only do a chip drop? Why does this not have just a more compelling feature set behind it, especially when they're both very similar in price? Like, people should just get the new MacBook Air instead of this MacBook Pro, right? Kinda, sorta. So if you look at last year's M1 MacBook Pro, in terms of the CPU, this would pull around 15 watts at maximum. You just like put it full tilt, 15 watt energy draw. This year on the M2, this pulls about 19 watts. It's not a massive jump up in energy consumption, but it's significant. And the same story with the GPU. So this M1 product from last year, it did about 10 watts at peak. This time around, it's like 13–14 watts. It may seem insignificant, but it adds up. So this year on M2, it's still a very energy efficient system, and it's a much stronger performer, but it doesn't come for free. That performance costs energy and produces heat, and in a laptop that's small like this, you try to get rid of that heat, right? The M2 MacBook Pro has a fan. The MacBook Air does not. And on M2, because these chips draw a little bit more energy than M1 did, I think that the difference in performance at the top end, in terms of like sustained performance, is gonna be quite different between what a fanless system can do versus what a fan-equipped system can do. Like, when you want to maintain a high level of performance for 20–30 minutes, I think the MacBook Pro will do a lot better, especially in a system that's small like this. Now, because Apple's launching their new chip, the new M2 chip, this is a very important chip to them. It's like their new baby, right? This is representing their, not just this product, but the future M2-based products to come. This has to perform really well, and they're going to choose a fan-equipped system to showcase it in. It's dated, but it does the job. It is an old design, and the bezels look extra thick on this device, but it's still a really solid system. Great performance, good battery life, and for enterprise customers, like if you're buying for corporate and you're buying hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of MacBooks at a time, I think you're gonna get way better discounts on this machine than you would for the upcoming M2 MacBook Air. Okay, I just wanna wrap up this conversation with, I guess, my overall thoughts on this product. So when this thing came in, I thought I would rip on it, right? A product like this should not work in 2022. Like, it really shouldn't. With hardware that's this old, like there's so much of it that's so dated that the user experience, I imagined, would have been heavily compromised, especially when you're surrounded by like really good high performance devices from Windows and just other options that don't have 6-year-old aesthetics on them, right? If you're looking at this thing with neutral eyes, this is still a very good product. It's arguably one of the best laptops still, despite it being loaded with so much archaic stuff. And the truth is, I think it just boils down to being Apple. Not because of their marketing and not because of the branding, but because Apple controls the whole stack, right? They control everything from the design of the product to the hardware that goes in it, to the operating system, to even the applications that people are even able to use on these systems. It's not good control, but it is control. And because they control it all, the user experience is so finely tuned, it's so well engineered that you can get away with this old hardware because the user experience is still really, really good. It's a good thing if you're into Apple, but it's a really weird thing as a reviewer because you're like, how do you recommend something like this when you shouldn't? But it just works. It just does. But if you think of it from Windows perspective, my God, like I never thought about this before, but Windows devices, like Windows laptops, they have to work with so many vendors, so many companies. Like you got to deal with Intel's chips or AMD's chips. Then you got to work with NVIDIA to get the graphics cards in. You got to deal with Microsoft for the operating system or with the Linux distro you were dealing with. Like there's so much stuff you have to take into account. And then the software, like what are the applications that people are using? There's so much stuff you have to take into consideration to make a user experience that's compelling and good for the user. And the task is way harder for Windows devices. But because of that, they could never pull this off. Can you imagine Dell selling a 6-year-old XPS product with just a chip drop? Like there's no way they would be able to sell that. But this, for whatever reason, it still works. So there you have it, the M2 MacBook Pro. It's new and very old at the same time.